Hey everyone, welcome to It's Messy, but It's So Good. I'm your host, Fran Medina, and today my guest is Karen Yee. And Karen is a reporter and journalist with WNYC in New York City and The Gothamist. And she currently is covering homelessness and poverty in the New York City area. And Karen has a really long history, about 10 years as a journalist. She started out covering for the Star Ledger in Newark, New Jersey, and then spent time in Florida and Miami working as a journalist. She actually grew up in Miami, and we talked a lot about how one balances work and life. And if you're a person has a very busy career in whatever your passion is, I think you'll enjoy this conversation because we really look at the importance of simplifying one's life and prioritizing really how to balance your career while being passionate, but also realizing all the other things that are important in your life. So enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of It's Messy, but It's So Good. And today my guest is Karen Yee. Welcome, Karen.
Hey, Fran.
And Karen is a reporter with WNYC. She covers New York City homelessness and poverty. And she's also a writer for The Gothamist. And I'm so excited to have her here, especially because she's my family. And I really would love to know, Karen, if you could share how you got started, because I do remember back in the day when you were, first in the field and, starting out. And anyone listening that maybe is interested in this work as a journalist, or even just interested in how one, really goes through their process of really making their passion a reality. I'd love to hear your story.
Absolutely. So I was a journalism student at NYU undergrad, and I graduated right after the recession. And so I graduated right after I missed the party. That's what I always like to say. Like, I feel like I got to the party when somebody called the parents, right? Where the newspapers were just laying people off en masse, right? I mean, the golden era was over, right? And there was no jobs. I had so much, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and I couldn't find work. And I had this degree that really didn't employ me. And so I wanted to stay in New York City. And the way I started was I did whatever job I could find. I was a bartender. I worked in a restaurant. I dog walked. I was a book researcher. And literally an editor walked into my bar. And that is how I got my first job. I mean, he walked into my bar, and he worked for an outlet at the time called Patch.com, which was a startup. It was a hyper-local news site that ended up being acquired by AOL. It was run by AOL, but it was later acquired by the Huffington Post. And the purpose was to sort of restart news, but in these in these small communities, right? Like town by town. And he was an editor at the West Orange in New Jersey, the West Orange Patch. And I kind of sort of convinced him at the time, we still used iPods, right? And so I showed him my resume on my iPod, and I was like, please hire me. Please, I'm looking for work. And, that was sort of the spark. And I started freelancing for him. He liked my work and continued freelancing while doing all these other jobs and sort of commuting between the city and West Orange, and eventually got hired full time. And that also kind of started my true understanding for the importance of local news. I think when I was a journalism student, like every journalism student, I wanted to write for the New Yorker. I wanted to be a magazine writer and write 10,000 words on something I didn't know anything about and have beautiful prose. But I think working and covering a town like West Orange, I really sort of learned how important what happens in your municipality is, right? How much oftentimes, the way your local school board makes decisions, the way your local zoning and planning commissions make decisions really determine what is built on your block, what is built in your community, the sort of the curriculum in your schools, the principal of your child's high school or middle school, right? These are the decisions that really affect our lives, and doesn't always get that much attention. And so I kind of saw the cause and effect very clearly, and sort of my role as a journalist very clearly. And I really fell in love with it. I would drive around West Orange, like looking for stories. I would look at like empty plots of lands, and there was a developer number or the company of a name that was going to do something on that land. And I would call and I would say, hey, what's coming here? What are you guys building? Or I would go to school board meetings and sort of find out where the school board was spending its money. I would go to town hall. I would go to, municipal council meetings. I would go to zoning and planning board meetings. That's how I would spend my nights. I was like 22 and broke, so I had nothing else to do, right? But sort of finding out the way this town was spending its money and what residents cared about, different kinds of environmental conservation projects. Like there's always been that sort of push and pull between sort of like development and conservation, but also like affordable housing and sort of people who pay a lot of taxes and want to know what the school system is doing with their taxes, right? Because your property taxes are so high in New Jersey. And so, from there it kind of snowballed. I mean, I was in New Jersey for a while, and then I ended up going back to Florida, which is where I'm from. I grew up in Miami, and trying local news at TV. I worked at NBC for a bit and then sort of missed the like being out in the field a lot and sort of being like, I realized that I'm a kind of person that has always had different interests. Even as a kid, I wanted to be an ice skater. I wanted to be a tap dancer. I wanted to do gymnastics. I played the flute, and then I played the saxophone, and then I played the violin, like my poor mother. I just wanted to be in all of these things and all of these clubs. And I think journalism was a beautiful vehicle for me because I can sort of put on the journalism hat to learn about different things that I didn't know about. Whether that's like how to read a town council budget, or how like tax credits work, or even as simple as like what it's like to teach like a class of fifth graders, right? Sort of what goes into that. So it allows me sort of to have all these diverse interests through this funnel that is journalism, and the privilege that is being able to ask people questions. So, I sort of miss being like my own agent in that way and being a reporter. And so I went back to New Jersey, and I started working at the Asbury Park Press there, and then eventually moved on to the Star Ledger, covering Newark, which is a lot of fun. And that was the largest paper in the state. And then eventually, bounced over to WNYC doing radio. And so at this point, I mean, I've done a little bit of everything, right? I've done radio, I've done TV, and I've done print, sort of for both digital platforms and sort of the physical like print newspaper. But always really guided by this interest in local journalism and sort of this passion for local news.
Yeah, speaking of that, can you share a little bit about what's going on currently in New York City? I mean, there's a lot going on, but in terms of, the SNAP benefits and, being cut, is there anything that you can share about currently what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of been like whiplash, with what's going on with SNAP. I mean, I think it's changing by the hour, right? There was a new ruling in one of the court hearings. A group of attorneys general are going to announce some other legal fight. And so there's just a lot of back and forth. And I think ultimately what's important is that it is confusing for people on SNAP, right? I mean, if you are a family who is receiving SNAP benefits, this is how you sort of patch together your groceries for the month, right? I mean, you get your SNAP. Usually people are working. Sometimes you rely on a pantry a couple times a month, and you sort of do that to get by, right? Because prices are so much higher than they used to be. And so maybe if SNAP wasn't up before, maybe it's not enough now. And I think it's incredibly confusing for somebody, right? If you're expecting to get your benefits on the 1st of the month or the 5th of the month, like, you plan that way, right? You plan to get your benefits, you plan to do your big haul at the store. And when you don't get that, it sort of disrupts your sort of like monthly planning and what you do, especially if you have kids and how you feed them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's ever changing. What I know about New York and New Jersey is New Jersey has released benefits for everyone who was overdue. New York is sort of on a rolling basis doing that. But obviously the Trump administration has asked states to undo that. I mean, how you undo what's already been loaded onto essentially a debit card and maybe even spent is unclear. So I think there's a lot of sort of like legal back and forth about what's going to happen. But then, at the same time, you have Senate Democrats potentially agreeing to a deal to end the government shutdown happening this week. And so
Right.
there's just so many moving pieces. And I think it's just been very, very chaotic at a very sort of fragile time for New Yorkers who are struggling, to put food on the table and just in general to afford living in the city.
Yeah, yeah. As far as like challenges in your career, because we all have challenges as we're moving through. What are some things that you can share that might have been challenges and how you kind of got through them, so that you have the energy, although sometimes we feel like we don't have the energy, but that you just continue going and pushing through with maybe support or other ways. If you can share a little bit of some of the challenges that you've had in your passion journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of like one of my challenges has been in being a little bit more able to set like boundaries, right? I think when you're really young and you're really eager, and especially at a time in the time in journalism that I sort of came to be, right, where I was the education reporter for the Sun Sentinel in Florida, covering two very, very two of the largest counties in Florida. They do county-based school districts, if you could believe it. And I was doing the job that used to be done by probably like 8 to 10 reporters, right? And so, in its heyday, and so I was doing a lot. And sort of when you're a young reporter and you're coming in at a time of a lot of turmoil, right, for the newspaper, it can feel a little bit like, I'm not necessarily the problem, but like I'm being brought in as a solution. Like I'm being brought as a 20-something to really replace people who have been covering this beat for many years, many decades, beloved colleagues. And I'm a cub reporter, right? I'm sort of new to this beat. And so I think one of my challenges was sort of in like building my confidence. And the way I sort of overcame that, which maybe isn't the best way, is I would just say yes to everything. I would be like the guinea pig. I'd be like, yeah, send me there. I'll happily do this. I will do this. And sort of like overworking myself to prove that A, I belonged there, and B, I could do this role. Right. And so it felt very personal, but it really was a systemic challenge and a systemic problem that sort of I could not solve alone. Right. The systemic problem being, sort of like how newspapers and companies have sort of funded journalism, and sort of the business decisions they made. Like it wasn't me, a 22-year-old, replacing, decades of experience in other journalists, but that's how it felt to me. And so I think that was really challenging. And it took me a few years really to sort of at some point be like, oh, I think I'm actually okay at this, like I think I can do this, and I think that's hard. And I think that can be applied to any career, right? I think so many industries have had these like seismic changes. And that's only going to get worse with AI, right? And so, especially if you're young and entering the field, like you have this like thirst to prove yourself. And I think in a way that can be good because you need hustle, you need eagerness, right? And when you don't have any commitments and you don't have kids and maybe you're not married yet, like you can sort of put in that extra mile. But I think it's also important to sort of recognize when you need to sort of celebrate what you are good at, right? And what you have learned, and then sort of start being a little bit more discerning with the things that you take on, the responsibilities you take on, and not necessarily always being that like, I'll do it. Yes. Like pick me. And so I think like that, now that I've been in the industry for a while, like, that's sort of the next challenge, like figuring out how to be a little bit more intentional about what I do and how I do it and the kind of work that I want to my name, and not being scared to say like, actually, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, actually, I think that's a waste of my time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a work in progress.
Yeah, sure. And I agree. pretty much in almost every career where we have to build confidence. When we start out, of course, for most people that's lacking, and it's through experience and then realizing, hey, wait a minute, this is overwhelming. I need to put up healthy boundaries. And it takes sometimes it takes a while to do that. But otherwise, we end up sick, either physically or mentally or both.
Yeah.
So, I think, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important, as a reminder for everyone within their passion journey, because you do have to have commitment. It's absolutely have to have commitment. Like, why are you even doing it if you don't have the commitment?
Right.
Then do something else that you're excited about. But there's so many ups and downs, I think, as you're going through the process. And then you get to a point where, I think it comes also as you're aging, that you have more wisdom. And you also are able to see what is really most important to you in your life, because I've gone through that myself in my career. And, you don't even know, like, should I retire, or, is this the right, there's whatever portion you are in your career, you're going through these reflective questions about what makes me happy, what's good for not only me, but my family. And, how can I have more balance? So thank you for sharing that, because I think that, it's true. It's a reality in anything that you love. So, I mean, how many amazing actors have become celebrities, and then they're really not happy.
Right.
I mean, it's just an example. It's like a very, obvious example.
I think everything has to have balance, even your passion. And I think it's sort of like ebbs and flows, like you said, like, right. So there are times where, yeah, absolutely. I'm working on an investigation, or I'm working on a project, and I'm putting in those really late hours, right? But it cannot be always. It needs to sort of come down from that, because you need to have good balance in your life in general, I think, to just achieve like contentment, right? And sort of find purpose. And I think, like, even those days were like slow days are good, like simple days are good, because it kind of gets your brain thinking again in different ways, and finding creative ways to tell stories, right? Because if you're always at like 110%, you really don't have the space or the time to kind of step back and think, well, did I like the way I did that, right? Is there something that I'm missing? Is there an angle that I didn't explore, or a story that I'm not telling? And sometimes you can't have those thoughts, right? If you're really in it, like, you have to look up sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think sort of making sure that if you ramp up, you also can sort of ramp down is really important, and good for your career at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. So I always love to ask my guests this question, which is, what has been the biggest personal gift that you have received from your journey?
I mean, I just had a son, so I mean, my son is like the best gift ever. I mean, he was, we tried a long time to get pregnant. It was a hard journey to get there, and I think he has really helped giving me clarity and in everything that I just said about like balance, right? I don't know that I think a year ago I would have probably given you a different answer, frankly. But I think he gives me a different sort of purpose, and allows me to be something other than a journalist. And that has been so freeing in many ways. And I'm absolutely still ambitious. I'm absolutely still committed and have a lot that I want to do. But I think, whatever day you had at the office, I walk home and, he's doing what he's doing. Like, his world is different, right? He sees the world very differently than I do. And I think it just sort of snaps me out of it and sort of forces me to stop sometimes, right? I have to stop working because I have to take care of him and feed him and give him a bath and, make sure he's alive. And so I think it, like, I think that's been the greatest gift, even professionally, right? Because it sort of forced me, I talked about being able to set boundaries and being a lot more intentional with my work. Like it's really forced me to do that. And I think for the better. And I think, all of that anxiety about, do I belong here? Do I know what I'm doing? I don't even have time for that, right? Like my brain is so occupied with like being a mom and then doing my job and then trying to feed this kid. Like the amount of energy I spend trying to figure out how to feed my child is like a whole other job, right? And so I don't necessarily have space for those, as many, I should say, for those like sort of like that tape you play in your brain. Like, should I have done this? Is that a stupid question? Should I have asked that? Like, why did I do that? I don't have time. And so in many ways, he's kind of like sort of like if you think like a sifter, like a flour, like sifted out the important things in my life, where I can just like start my day with like a lot of purpose. I know what I want to do. I'm much more, I think I communicate more clearly too about the things that I want, the things that I need, the things that like make a good story. And so I don't know. I think he's been just a joy and a light in my life. And, it's like really, I don't know that I always wanted to be a parent. Frankly, I didn't always want to be a parent. I think, I don't know if there's like a magic or biological clock or something. Like one day I woke up and I was like, oh, I want a baby. And like, it was like pretty sudden. I was like, yeah, actually I want a baby. And, so it's not like it's something that I've been dreaming about my whole life or anything, but, it's just much more joyful than I thought it would be. And like so much fun, I think, to see this little like human that is part you, part your partner, part like other members of your family, sort of like really holding up a big mirror to you, right?
Yeah.
But you're holding up a big mirror in like in all of your hypocrisy and like who you are and all your flaws. And just like laughing, like his laugh is the best. And so I think absolutely, without a doubt, best gift for forever. I think I don't think there'll be a better gift than that.
Yeah, the word that came to me was gratitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gives you a pure sense of gratitude that you don't really get like, oh yeah, I have this great job or I'm doing my purpose right now in terms of my career. But when you have, a life that comes, like you said, that's part of you and your partner and your family, and it's a certain gratitude that it's very pure and very, clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gives you a direction, a perspective to carry through, and it gets better and better, I think, as time goes by in each phase. But yeah, it's not for everyone, perhaps parenthood, but but and I think also when sometimes you have difficulty conceiving, as I also did, it's like, oh, okay, you have another form of gratitude, that
Right.
you really appreciate, because we can't take things for granted in life. It just doesn't work that way. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Karen, how can people reach you if they want to connect with you?
So I've gotten off of like Twitter these days, but my LinkedIn is around and you can message me on LinkedIn. You can also email me, and I don't know if you'll share my email address, but
Sure.
you could send me a note there or share me a note on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Happy to respond. Yeah.
I'm going to put all your contacts in the show notes. So if there's anyone out there that has a hot tip,
Of course,
or just wants to comment on the podcast, or maybe someone aspiring towards this field of journalism, or just wants to comment, I'm sure Karen would love to hear from you. And before we close out for today, is there anything? Oh, and I also want to mention that I am going to put, we really didn't talk about this. The funding has disappeared from the government for WNYC and public radio. So I'm going to put a link for donations. And that's something that I've been doing for a while, which I'm really glad that I had been donating. If anyone out there wants to support the great work that Karen and so many other journalists are doing, you can donate, even if it's $5 a month. Anything is going to help because the funding has been cut. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. Before we wrap up, anything else that you want to share about anything?
I mean, I think, we didn't talk about this, but I think when thinking about just sort of, like living your life with a lot more intention, and I think what I'm craving these days is like simplicity. I like, which is like a weird, I'm always moving, I'm always doing things. And, I realize that my favorite days are the days where we just kind of like go to our local playground and like have a nice meal together as a family with our dog, Cashew, and our baby. Like I crave this sort of like going back to like local and going back to community. And I think when there is so much sort of uncertainty, whether it's SNAP, whether it's federal funding of whatever program, sort of politics, like wherever you are, right? The economy, I think like kind of going back to like the very basics is something that I found really sort of refreshing and sort of rejuvenating, right? In the times of what can be like scary times and sort of, I just like going back to like small things, right? Small, important things, your family, your community, your neighborhood, checking on your neighbors, like that. I think I find a lot of just like purpose and joy in and clarity, I think, when everything else can feel so overwhelming.
Yeah. And taking a little bit of time to connect with ourselves in any way that we, as you said, all those things, but also just checking in and, with our anxiety level on a daily basis if we have anxiety, because a lot of times people, they're so in the stress response that they might even know that they're actually feeling anxious. To just take that time for yourself, just take some breaths and just to spend a few minutes. It's so important to have, in my opinion, a little bit of a centering practice. Mm-hmm. And also all the things that you're saying, which is really mindfulness of acknowledging all the things in your life that are important and of appreciating them. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Karen. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. And
thank you.
I'll see you.
Take care. I'll definitely see you. Thank you so much, Fran.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of It's Messy, but It's So Good. And I want to thank my guest, Karen Yee, for sharing so authentically her journey with a very fulfilling career, but a very fulfilling life as well, and how to balance that out. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague and pass it on, and give us a review and follow us. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify and all the podcast channels, and we're also on YouTube, and all of that is in the show notes. Also, if you'd like to reach out to Karen, you can contact her through the show notes, through email, LinkedIn, and The Gothamist. You can read some of her articles. Consider donating to WNYC.org. As you know, the funding from the government has stopped, and they're really dependent now on people who enjoy the show and get a lot of information. So think about donating. Even a small donation will go a long way. Again, thank you so much, Karen, and we'll see you next time.